Hello and welcome to Guidance Review. I'm David Pudwill, and today we're going to be talking about FDA's guidance document on post-market surveillance under Section 522 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that was published in draft in May of 2021. A couple key topics we'll be discussing during today's video are 1. Pre-522 post-market surveillance process, 2. Post-market surveillance plans and changes, and 3. Submitting post-market surveillance reports. Just to bear in mind that procedures for handling post-approval studies imposed by Premarket Approval Application Order draft guidance for industry was also published on the same day, and the comment period for both of these draft guidances ended on July 26th, 2021. So, without much further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. If we go ahead and scroll down, we can see here, we can go check out the guidance document itself, which is what we're going to do in today's video. You can go read the Federal Register notice, you can comment, submit your comments online. Again, those comments needed to be received by July 26th, 2021. So at the moment, you're out of luck if you had comments. Let's go over to the draft guidance document, I guess I should say. And here we can see that the document was issued on May 27th, 2021. Some more details on where you can provide comments on this guidance and where you can send your questions. Here's a note that when this guidance is final, it will supersede the post-market surveillance under Section 522 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was issued on May 16th, 2016. We get down here into the preface. You can order additional copies. I don't know if anybody actually does that, quite frankly, but it's an interesting thing that you could still potentially do. And then we have a table of contents, and we talked a little bit at a high level about what we're going to be getting into here. And we'll just move ahead into the body of the guidance itself, and we'll get into the introduction. Just for those of you who may not be familiar, Section 522 provides the Food and Drug Administration with the authority to require manufacturers to conduct post-market surveillance at the time of approval or clearance or at any time thereafter of certain Class 2 or Class 3 devices. Post-market surveillance is the active, systematic, scientifically valid collection, analysis, and interpretation of data or other information about a marketed device. The data collected under a surveillance order help to address important public health questions on the safety and effectiveness of a device. This draft guidance, when finalized, will assist manufacturers of devices subject to Section 522 post-market surveillance orders, and here provides an overview and some information about how to fulfill your obligations under Section 522 if it's applicable to you. If we move forward a little bit, FDA also gives us some surveillance status categories and recommendations on format and content, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. In terms of the legal background here, FDA cites the relevant regulation. Here specifically, FDA's focus is on Class 2 or Class 3 devices for which failure of the device would be reasonably likely to have a serious adverse health consequence. A Class 2 or Class 3 device expected to have significant use in pediatric populations, or a Class 2 or Class 3 device that is intended to be implanted in the human body for more than 1 year, or a Class 2 or Class 3 device that is intended to be a life-sustaining or life-supporting device used outside of a device user facility. So this could be a home use device, or would be a home use device, or sort of thought of as a home use device. You might not actually be in your home when you're using that device, but nonetheless, it's outside of a device user facility. And then, in terms of the identification of the issue, if there's a device issue, for instance, FDA may identify device issues that are appropriate for post-market surveillance at any point during the life cycle of a Class 2 or Class 3 device. So if you don't have a 522 already for your Class 2 or Class 3 device, FDA could at some point, usually driven by reports or some specific issue with a type of device, might issue a 522 post-market surveillance order for your product. Examples of situations that may raise post-market questions during both the pre-market and post-market periods are listed below, and these include to better understand the nature, severity, or frequency of suspected problems reported in adverse event reports, obtain more information on device performance associated with real-world clinical practice, address long-term or infrequent safety and effectiveness issues for implantable and other devices for which the pre-market testing provided more limited information, and better define the association between problems and devices when unexpected or unexplained serious adverse events occur after a device is marketed. If there's a change in the nature of serious adverse events, or if there is an increase in the frequency of serious adverse events. And this will happen occasionally. In terms of the team review of issues, so this is going to be the FDA team reviewing a specific issue that has come up for one of the reasons that we've mentioned above. In assessing the appropriateness of issuing a 522 order, multiple elements are considered as indicated below, with the goal of making a determination as to whether or not post-market surveillance should be ordered. In addition, FDA may also choose to engage external stakeholders prior to the issuance of a 522 order. Some of the elements considered by FDA are the following. Are the statutory criteria met? So is it a Class 2 or Class 3 device, meeting the criteria laid out above? What is the public health question? What is the public health question based on? And is the public health issue device specific or device type specific? For a device for which a condition of clearance or approval is being considered, can and should the public health question be addressed pre-market rather than as part of a 522 order? Is there any other source of data or action or combination that may be used to address the public health question? Does another ongoing study address the public health question? What types of 522 post-market surveillance designs should be recommended? And we'll get into that a little bit later here. And what combination of efforts should be considered to address the public health question? In addition, when applicable, what changes, if any, are being made with regard to the pre-market review? And then we get into considerations regarding pediatric population provisions. As noted above, the statute authorizes post-market surveillance for Class 2 and 3 devices that are expected to have a significant use in pediatric populations, and also authorizes the agency to order post-market surveillance as a condition of clearance or approval for devices expected to have significant use in pediatric populations. These provisions are not limited to devices labeled for pediatric use, and therefore specific consideration is given to devices with anticipated pediatric use. In terms of the issuance of a 522 order, so this is when you actually will get a letter from FDA if you get a 522 order, or when FDA will put that together and send that to a manufacturer. The 522 order will specify the devices subject to the surveillance order and the reasons that FDA is requiring post-market surveillance. The order will also typically include any general or specific guidance that is available to assist the manufacturer subject to the 522 order in preparing the post-market surveillance plan. FDA intends to identify the pre-market submission involved, that would be a 510K or PMA or an HDE or de novo, in the 522 order. A 522 order could also include timelines for certain surveillance plan milestones, such as subject enrollment, data accrual, and submission of the final report, depending on the plan and timing of the order. If a manufacturer disagrees with any order or condition requiring post-market surveillance, a manufacturer may request review under Section 562. And here we see some further detail about when FDA can issue a post-market surveillance order. They can issue it at the time of device approval or clearance or any time thereafter. And here we see that a manufacturer must commence post-market surveillance not later than 15 months after the day the order is issued. FDA typically considers post-market surveillance to have commenced when the first subject is enrolled, as outlined in the approved surveillance plan. And then here we see that surveillance plans that require enrolling subjects in a prospectively targeted manner are more likely to achieve timely completion by following the recommended schedule below from the date of issuance of the 522 order. So this is study commenced within 15 months, 20% of subjects enrolled within 18 months, 50% by 21 months, and 100% within 24 months. Post-market surveillance plans, FDA will assign a number for each 522 order, and manufacturers should use that reference, that PS number, when submitting a proposed post-market surveillance plan. So include the PS and the number that follows it whenever you are following up with FDA about the post-market surveillance plan. If there are multiple post-market surveillance questions in a 522 order that require different methodologies to address each question, then a separate post-market surveillance plan should be submitted for each question, and it's tracked as an individual requirement under the post-market surveillance order number. FDA will confirm receipt and identify each plan submission by a unique document number. And here you'll see the requirement for how quickly you need to get back to FDA. And this should also be laid out in the letter itself. And then some more general information elements to include in a post-market surveillance plan. The following items should be included: a post-market surveillance plan objective addressing the surveillance questions, post-market surveillance approach or methodology to be used, the subject of the study, that would be the patient population, for instance, the variables and endpoints for assessing the surveillance questions, the sample size, the description of the data source, description of data collection plan, data collection forms, informed consent forms, IRB approval or IRB exception forms, and patient follow-up plan or schedule. Furthermore, all data analyses and statistical tests that are planned, investigators' agreement, procedures for monitoring conduct and progress of the surveillance, and the content and timing of the post-market surveillance reports. FDA recommends that you also include in your surveillance plan a background section. That is a brief description of the device, the regulatory history, the indications for use, an enrollment and recruitment plan. In general, Section 522 authorizes FDA to order prospective post-market surveillance for a duration up to 36 months unless the manufacturer and FDA agree to extend this time frame, or if there is no agreement after the completion of a dispute resolution as described in Section 562. FDA and manufacturer agreement on surveillance plan. FDA will evaluate the proposed surveillance plan to determine whether it is administratively complete, whether the person designated to conduct surveillance has appropriate qualifications and experience to undertake such surveillance, and if the plan will result in the collection of useful data that can reveal unforeseen adverse events or other information necessary to protect the public health. So FDA can issue one of the following orders: a not acceptable letter, an approval letter, or a major deficiency letter, or a disapproval letter. And if the manufacturer disagrees with FDA about the content of the surveillance plan or the surveillance plan is disapproved, possible recourse, again, is laid out here in 21 CFR Part 16, or requesting review of a dispute resolution panel. And a manufacturer may also request a meeting with FDA, with the FDA employee that has signed the 522 order. FDA developed this guidance document in part to help facilitate timely discussions with manufacturers on post-market surveillance plans, issues, and challenges. Early and ongoing interactions with FDA should be the primary method to ensure the adequacy of the 522 surveillance plans and to resolve any issues. And then in terms of changes to approved post-market surveillance plans, if a manufacturer wishes to propose a change to an approved post-market surveillance plan that will affect the nature or validity of the data collected, the manufacturer must obtain FDA approval in writing before making such changes. Also, if a manufacturer wishes to propose a change in the surveillance plan completion dates, the manufacturer should submit that plan revision as part of a supplement for review and approval. The manufacturer should not combine a surveillance plan change request, which includes timeline changes, with any 522 report, but instead should submit the request and the revised post-market surveillance plan for FDA review and approval as a standalone supplement to the post-market surveillance order number. Any submission involving a change to an approved post-market surveillance plan is tracked by FDA as a supplement and should be identified by the assigned PS number. In keeping with FDA's practice of focusing review resources on complete submissions, requests to change an approved post-market surveillance plan will first undergo acceptance review to determine whether the supplement is administratively complete. Once accepted for substantive review, FDA may also find other deficiencies with the supplement and issue a minor or major deficiency letter identifying those issues that the manufacturer would need to address in order to receive approval. And here, unless FDA approves the revised surveillance plan, the manufacturer remains responsible for completing the post-market surveillance following the previously approved surveillance plan. And here, failure to meet the milestones and timelines outlined in the approved surveillance plan may result in enforcement action by FDA. And here we get into the types of post-market surveillance. This is pretty extensive. I'll basically refer you to the table here. But FDA can use a number of different types of post-market surveillance designs. That could be a randomized clinical trial, a prospective cohort study, a retrospective cohort study. It could be a cross-sectional study. It could be enhanced surveillance. It could be active surveillance, meta-analysis, or prospective and retrospective studies, or a case control study, or a non-clinical study or animal study. I would just caution you here around non-clinical and animal studies. Sometimes you'll have discussions with FDA prior to the clearance or approval of a device. And if FDA suggests that they would like to see some non-clinical studies in the context of a 522, because that's atypical and because of just how FDA handles some of these things, you might find yourself doing a more clinical style study, even for what you thought you were maybe getting yourself into in terms of a non-clinical study. So I would caution you, if you're in discussions with FDA around non-clinical studies under post-market surveillance as a means of addressing issues rather than doing that non-clinical study in a pre-market context, I would think long and hard about that, because the 522 study is likely to grow as FDA looks at that. So once FDA decides that they're going to pursue a 522, the nature of that and what that looks like can change. So in general, FDA is also going to look at whether pre-market data is needed or whether post-market data is acceptable. But I would caution manufacturers, if you can address FDA's concerns with pre-market non-clinical data, you're generally better off doing that. And then here we see there's also other designs. When and how to submit post-market surveillance reports. Here we see this outlined, that manufacturers must submit interim and final reports as specified in the post-market surveillance plan. The final post-market surveillance report is a written report of a post-market surveillance requirement that has been completed or terminated. And unless otherwise specified, for each post-market surveillance requirement, manufacturers should submit an interim post-market surveillance status report every 6 months for the first 2 years and annually thereafter from the date of the 522 post-market surveillance plan approval or other agreed upon starting date separately for each unique requirement. In order to ensure proper review, the manufacturer should indicate the type of report and the time span on the report cover letter in bold letters. So this could be the enrollment report, 6-month interim post-market surveillance status report, or 12-month interim post-market surveillance status report, or final post-market surveillance report. And for final reports, FDA also recommends that manufacturers clearly identify the post-market surveillance requirement for which the report is being submitted. And here we see as well, for content and format of post-market surveillance reports, FDA's ability to adequately track and evaluate post-market surveillance depends on the quality and timeliness of the information provided. The recommendations in this section are intended to help ensure that post-market surveillance reports contain adequate information for the agency to identify the devices being studied, the specific post-market surveillance being conducted, the status of that post-market surveillance, and, if applicable, the reasons for any delays or failures to complete the post-market surveillance. General information is one thing that FDA wants, and this is outlined here on the page. So in terms of general information, FDA recommends that this detailed here on page 17 and 18 of this draft guidance, that this information, so the company name, the street address, the city, etc., the post-market surveillance tracking number, that PS number we talked about before, date of issuance of the 522 order, date of post-market surveillance plan approval, device trade name, device model number, report information, type of submission, etc. And in terms of post-market surveillance enrollment reports, FDA intends to review enrollment reports to assess progress towards the surveillance plan milestones. The enrollment report should include sufficient information to allow FDA and the manufacturer to track progress toward the enrollment milestones, which include the date of approval of the surveillance plan, the start and completion dates for clinical site enrollments, number of IRB approvals, and number of clinical sites at which the surveillance was initiated, number of subjects enrolled, subject enrollment start dates, comparison of target versus actual enrollment dates, etc. And in terms of interim post-market surveillance status reports, FDA also has outlined what they would expect to see for this type of report here, and for the final post-market surveillance report as well. FDA has outlined a bulleted list of what they would expect to see in this kind of a report. And in terms of FDA's evaluation of interim post-market surveillance reports, FDA intends to consider multiple factors when evaluating these reports, including the completeness of the report content, the expected versus actual status of the study at the time of the report, the causes for and solutions to delays, adherence to methodology of the post-market surveillance plan, and whether information in the reports addresses the public health question or questions. And then here, in terms of evaluation of post-market surveillance final reports and possible FDA actions after 522 order completion, FDA recommends that the final post-market surveillance report describes the methodology and results and explain how it fulfills the public health question identified in the 522 order. FDA will consider several factors, including, again, the completeness of the report content, adherence to the methodology of the post-market surveillance plan, evaluation of information in the report to assess the performance of the device, and evaluation of fulfillment of the 522 order. And if the results of the post-market surveillance raises new issues or questions, additional actions may be warranted. In such circumstances, FDA could, for example, request changes to the labeling of the device to reflect additional information learned from the post-market surveillance, issue a new post-market surveillance order to address new issues, or consider administrative or regulatory actions to protect the public health. So that could be request an update to a device's indications for use statement, for instance. And then manufacturer's reporting status. Here, FDA is going to have a status of report on time, report overdue, or report overdue and received. And in terms of the post-market surveillance status, after the review of a supplement, FDA will consider the manufacturer's progress, and factors in considering the post-market surveillance status include assessing the status of surveillance plan approval, after surveillance plan approval, assessing whether the surveillance plan milestones are met, progress with the data accrual, and submission of a final report. Based on the above, FDA will review the potential progress categories, and here are some of the options: plan pending, plan overdue, surveillance pending or ongoing, delayed, non-compliant, completed, terminated, redesigned, replaced, hold, or consolidated. And FDA wants to remind you here in this section that failure to comply with post-market surveillance requirements under Section 522 of the FDA Act is a prohibited act under Section, here's some regulatory language reference here, and renders the device misbranded. And note that violations may lead to enforcement actions, including seizure of product, injunction, prosecution, and/or civil money penalties as appropriate. Furthermore, the failure to have an approved post-market surveillance plan could also be the basis for enforcement action, and there may be instances in which it is impossible or inappropriate for a manufacturer to complete a particular post-market surveillance order, and manufacturers may request exemption from that requirement to conduct post-market surveillance for their devices, which FDA will consider under 21 CFR 822.30. Unless an exemption is granted, manufacturers must comply with the 522 order. If a manufacturer stops marketing the device subject to the post-market surveillance order, it still must continue to conduct post-market surveillance in accordance with the approved plan unless notified otherwise by the agency. And here they say on a case-by-case basis, they'll assess requests to terminate or modify post-market surveillance. Alternatively, if FDA determines a surveillance plan will no longer answer or adequately address questions raised in a 522 order, for example, because of the post-market surveillance design or data inadequacies or due to a discontinuation in marketing or manufacturing of the device, FDA intends to discuss the establishment of a new post-market surveillance plan and schedule with the manufacturer. And here, FDA also notes regarding public disclosure of post-market surveillance plan information and reports. After approval, FDA may disclose the contents of the original submission and any amendments, supplements, or reports in accordance with applicable disclosure laws, such as the Freedom of Information Act. When FDA discloses such information, FDA will continue to protect any trade secret or confidential commercial information, as well as any personal privacy information of patients. Any post-market surveillance study that is an applicable device clinical trial as defined in this section must comply with registration and results submission requirement for such clinical trials, for instance, at clinical trials webpage. In terms of the FDA website, FDA posts information about post-market surveillance on the FDA's 522 webpage, and there's a link here. As noted, this information is posted in compliance with applicable disclosure statutes and regulations, and the information that may be included are as follows here. This general information about the number, the manufacturer name, device name, the specialty, the medical specialty, the date of the issuance of the 522 order, study surveillance name, most recent surveillance plan approval date, study surveillance plan overall status, general surveillance plan parameters, detailed surveillance plan parameters, interim post-market surveillance status report information, final post-market surveillance report results, and reporting information. And then we get into an administrative checklist here that might be useful for you. So that wraps up our video for today. Thank you for joining me in today's video. Today, just as a reminder, we talked about FDA's guidance document on post-market surveillance under Section 522 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And three key topics that we discussed were 1, pre-522 post-market surveillance process, 2, post-market surveillance plans and changes, and 3, submitting post-market surveillance reports. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you found it informative and useful, and I also hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. We'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.